What's going on is that without a tacky baseball, pitchers are letting balls fly, and sometimes they get away from them, and people are getting hit more than ever because 7 of the top 25 teams out of that list of 25 have been in the past 8 years in terms of getting hit by pitches. It's kind of an epidemic that nobody talks about.
Well, I guess that's the first thing. So has the hit by pitch been going up season over season, like in history recently? Are we at like a new high for it, or is it something where we're more looking at like a slight increase, or just like a variance here where like there was a spike for a couple of years?
Well, what I thought was significant is, like I said, the all-time things. You know, the older teams, right? And so I actually looked up. So the overhand pitching, 60 feet 6 inches. It was all like it is today by around 1894, which is good. And that happens to be the first year that you have one of these big numbers where guys got hit.
Yeah,
so that's it, right? All of a sudden, people are throwing overhand, and people are getting hit. Well, that kind of makes sense, right? They're trying to figure out how to pitch.
Well, like, right, and that's kind of what makes the first thing that's kind of paradoxical about the fact that we're seeing more hits batsmen now than ever is that we would expect not only are the pitchers supposed to be better now than ever, that we shouldn't be seeing as many hit batsmen just because, like, well, they know not to do that, and they're all really good, but also the batters are more athletic than ever, so shouldn't they be also better at dodging out of the way, especially considering how hard the guys throw? Or do you think that's the reason guys just throw it so hard now that it's just hard to dodge?
I would think it would be easier to dodge an 80-mile-an-hour fastball than a 101-mile-an-hour fastball.
Right, logically, that's pretty true.
So, and that all of a sudden, after having nothing, all those records, actually, there's more than 6. There's like 6 or maybe 7 teams that are in that top tier. And then nothing, right? No teams from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s have teams that got hit more than any of those original teams in the 1890s, all the way until 1997, which was the last year of baseball expansion.
Interesting. So it's like I guess the first thing I'm noticing there is that you have this weird kind of like valley here, where it's like you start off high, then it drops down for a long time before now climbing back up and up and up, and we're seeing more guys get hit than ever. Because when you look at like the individual list, the person that has been hit the most times in history is a player from 94. Huey Jennings.
Oh, he played through that whole period.
For the Orioles, I believe.
He did play for those. They were champion Orioles in 1894, 95, and 96.
And he was hit 287 times in his career. Number 2 is Craig Biggio, who was hit 285 times in his career. So it's weird that you have 2 guys that played over like 100 years apart, basically, that are 1 and 2 in a statistical category, especially hit by pitches, because you'd expect that to be dominated by guys that played a super long time ago, even though they did play fewer games per season.
Now, I don't know if it means that Huey Jennings was just really bad at getting out of the way of the ball.
Well, he said that he crowded the plate and that, most smart people tried to dodge out of the way, but he was always stubborn.
and I had to look the guy up because he's in the Hall of Fame, right? So when you look at his baseball reference page, not all that impressive. 18 career home runs.
But he played at a time when nobody hit home runs.
He played shortstop on that 3-time Oriole World Series team, and that's just before 1900. But it's still overhand pitching at least. And then he became a manager for a lot of years, quite successfully. He managed the Tigers and Ty Cobb in the early 1900s. And then he died tragically at 58, and it took him 17 years before he was elected to the Hall of Fame as a player, though. So I've got to believe that, like, somebody, I don't know if it was John McGraw, somebody was on this committee going, we got to put Huey Jennings in there.
Right,
because he got hit more than any, but that dude would get hit.
But that would be the thing that would matter to them. Well, he's been hit by more pitches. Like, that is like a Hall of Fame thing, I think maybe people would consider, just because, well, he's the most of all time. You kind of have to put him
I don't know. That doesn't make sense.
Not like he tried to do that.
So there are definitely hitters who have reputations through their career, and I think you remember Jason Kendall. So he
got hit a lot.
Don Baylor before your time, but Don Baylor was good at getting hit with the baseball.
Well, Don Baylor was number 2 until Craig Biggio came along. I think Don Baylor was
a guy named Tommy Tucker in there, too.
So it's interesting when you look at the list that it's kind of the similar thing between the individuals and the teams. We have a couple guys from like the 1890s and the early 1900s, and then mostly modern players. Really, Baylor being the one guy that sort of bridges the gap in my mind.
But Anthony Rizzo is number 8 on the all-time list.
An active player.
And we know he's got a reputation. And who else? We watched him play in New York for, I think, a year or two. A guy who just was really good. And he's always yearly, even he's still active now, at getting hit by pitches.
Oh, Sterling Marte.
Mark Canha.
Oh, Mark Canha and Sterling Marte.
And Marte gets hit, but Mark Canha and
even Pete Alonso gets hit a lot.
Marte is 21st on the all-time list, to your point, for being hit by pitches. And I think Canna's number 34, so he's trying to gain on him at this point. But all of these guys have well over 100 hit by pitch, not like Hugh Jennings 285.
Oh, you're right.
But still, and so they have a real penchant because they lean over the plate, or it's part of their game, I think.
I think what the other interesting thing is you're not seeing guys put up crazy single season hit by pitch totals. The all-time record, I think, is still by Huey Jennings at
51.
51, with another couple guys having 50 in a single season.
When I was a kid, there was a guy named Ron Hunt who was pretty much a below-average baseball player, but he was a kid, right? He played second base for the Mets, and I knew he was really good at getting hit by the pitch. He got hit 50 times for the Expos after he left the Mets.
Wow.
But this guy's like, okay, well, I guess, if he can't get a hit, get hit.
But, like, you notice you have that kind of, like, you have those couple guys showing up, but, like, you don't see people now in these days with guys getting hit more than ever suddenly having a season where somebody gets hit 60 times in a season.
Yeah, no, 30, like, it tops out around 30-ish now.
Which is interesting because it means just more people are being hit overall. It's not like there's a sudden uptick in guys crowding the plate, so there's, like, a couple guys that, like, okay, well, all of a sudden there's, like, 6 or 7 guys in the league that all super crowd the plate, so there's just, like, a higher total than normal. No. The number of batters overall that is being hit, the percentage is much higher today than it's ever been.
I'm thinking as you're saying this, I don't think they would track this kind of stuff, but doesn't it seem to you when you watch baseball that pitchers throw wildly off pitches more than ever before, like something that just goes sailing in the wrong direction out of, like, he didn't get on top of a slider or something goes flying. I just noticed that pitches, not even like close.
What I notice is it's not that it's happening. It is happening more often, but I think more specifically, it's happening more often on fastballs. It used to be you'd only ever see the guys really spiking sliders, and the splitter pitchers would spike a splitter. But now you're seeing guys...
See, that 5 times faster.
Spiking a splitter.
Very good.
Right, but you've got these pitchers now that are just losing fastballs in wild ways, where like you'll just see a guy sail a fastball to the backstop. And so I think that does kind of go back to maybe what you opened with in regards to the baseball itself. Is that maybe a solution here that for whatever reason, Major League Baseball is very concerned about giving the pitchers a very tacky baseball, and by having a baseball that's less tacky, are we seeing more hit by pitches?
I think that is the case, and it's not that it's, I don't know if it's less tacky, it's just they're not going out of their way to make it tackier, which all the pitchers are saying we really would like it so we wouldn't have to deal with this sticky stuff. They're still checking people for sticky stuff because they're worried guys are loading up.
Right, so why not just make the baseball itself stickier, and then guys don't need to load up, and you don't have this weird game where the pitcher's tactile sensation on the baseball is different game to game because he can't always put the same amount of sticky stuff on his hand. So it's just he's never going to necessarily feel good. So we should try and maybe have regular baseballs available for him.
Seems like a simple solution, right? Or it should be.
I mean, Japan has tackier
baseballs. Right.
It doesn't impact the quality of the game anyway. And if we're really that concerned about, like it might make the pitchers too unhittable because now they can control too well, lower the mound by an inch or something.
And then we talked about that as well. And I think hopefully, and I always say this because I like to take it to the nth degree, that nobody gets hurt in the process of this, right? It just takes one slip pitch for a Ray Chapman situation to happen.
Well, I think the problem is that they're not going to blame the tackiness of the baseball if and when that does eventually happen. It's not as if people haven't been hurt before by hit by pitches. It's just, how hurt does someone need to get for it to permanently alter the game? Unfortunately, there's only going to be one thing that's going to really cause that. Even if a guy gets hit and he breaks his arm or his leg, and maybe it looks really bad on TV, that's not going to cause baseball to change because there was literally a court case ruling when I think a University of South Carolina, I want to say South Carolina player was hit. And basically, the judge said, look, getting hit by a baseball is part of the game.
It's an assumed risk.
It's an assumed risk that's part of the game. You can't litigate that.
We'll have to ask Kelly Franco Throop about that.
Right. So I just think that is the kind of thing that no matter how hard you try, it's going to happen. So I think unless something bad happens, the players themselves need to say, hey, we want this change for this reason. And I think having a tackier baseball would be good just because we don't have to do the sticky stuff.
Yeah. It kind of bugs me that they got to check the pitchers every time they go on the field as a relief pitcher and every time they leave the field if they've been out there. So also I had to look up and say like, oh, so are there guys? They used to call them like headhunters, pitchers that he'll throw. Bob Gibson would throw inside to his own grandmother if she stood over the.
And what's funny is he actually didn't hit a ton of guys.
No,
in
he
his
didn't
career.
actually. He wasn't. But you were worried about that he might.
Well, because he buzzed. See, that's he had a reputation for buzzing people, but he was so good that just meant he threw close to them. He didn't actually hit them.
And any pitcher, that's pitched, a few years ago, like our man Ron Darling, always talks about, obviously, all these pitchers have to be able to pitch inside, and buzzing guys and using that inside to get a little bit of room on the plate is a totally legit baseball concept, and I hope never leaves baseball.
And something that you could argue is that part of the reason why you saw less hit by pitches is that when the majority of the pitchers threw 90 miles an hour for their fastball, like 90 to 93, trying to beat guys inside is a lot more of a concerning thing. Because you're like, do I really want to throw inside? Because if I miss, he's going to crush this thing. When you throw 98, you're a little less worried about that.
I think that's true. Before you have UCL surgery, apparently.
Right, exactly. But I think that's part of the reason why there's more pitchers unafraid to really pump it inside these days.
And so the all-time list, and as I think of it now when I'm looking at it again, I did a trivia question this week that the modern era, right?
Oh, because I know Walter Johnson has the most hit by pitches.
In the modern era, because there are guys in the 1800s. Gus Weiing is number one. He hit 277 batters in his major league career.
I thought Johnson hit 305.
205.
205.
205 with the big unit, Johnson, Randy, right behind Walter at 190, which is they're number 4 and 5 on the list.
Right, so I think it's interesting that you've got two of the greatest pitchers of all time super high on there. Which
almost 75 years apart in pitching.
Right, which tells you if you pitch a long time, you're going to hit a number of
that
batters.
it's exactly like all the names up here. There are a lot of Hall of Fame names, but Eddie Plank, Hall of Famer, Iron Man Joe McGinn.
Right.
I wonder why he was called Iron Man.
Threw a ton of innings. So guys that it's kind of
Cy Young.
Right, if you look at the teams that have been hit by the most overall pitches, it's pretty much which were the teams that started baseball first.
Right.
The Giants. The Giants are number 1. The Phillies are number 2, and I think the Reds are number 3.
But you got, and it was interesting to me, like I said, also at the beginning is, so people got hit a lot when they started throwing overhand, and that when you think of that, totally makes sense, right?
Their pitchers are learning a new style.
And there was a time where you actually even could throw sort of overhand, but you still the batter could indicate where they wanted the pitch, high or low. It probably was never in my back.
Right, exactly. That was a complete miss. And I guess when you're throwing underhand, it's a lot more, capable for the pitcher to just toss it exactly where the batter is telling them to hit it. Though it's hard for me to think of that as the same game as baseball.
Right. So I think the 30 is a lot for today for one player to be hit. The teams themselves, I think the Twins lead Major League Baseball in being hit this year.
Now, I will also say, is part of the reason why we're seeing more teams hit by more pitches than ever, because there's just more teams and more games being played than ever. It's a lot easier for there to be more pitches, guys getting hit when the league is bigger than it was.
Okay.
In 1930 to 1960, there were 16 teams. Now there's a lot more teams, so of course there's less guys getting hit by pitches.
That's a great point, because when you think about 162 games and 30 teams, that's what 4,860
right.
Or something like that games. Whereas when you had 10 teams and 150 games, that's 1,500 games. That's like a third of games.
Right, exactly. It's a really big difference. So that's why you're also seeing more
cumulative numbers.
Right, cumulative numbers. But so that's why the total number of hitters being hit isn't like that off, but it does mean that we're still seeing lots of guys being hit at a high rate for this many guys to be being hit.
And I would say, I'll go out, this is a wild stab, like what percentage, and I'll try to think of my answer, of hit by pitches are intentional?
I gotta think a pretty low number of them.
Is it 10%?
I'd say 5.
Okay, I'm thinking under 10%.
It might be lower than 5, because if
you'll never really know the answer to this, because no one's ever going to admit to it.
But like just from knowing the number of games that we've watched throughout the season and the number of times we really see a guy kind of get hit on purpose, it's pretty low. The only teams that really seem to get into that are the Yankees when they're playing the Rays and the Orioles. They like to hit each other. That just happens a lot.
And I guess comes a point where it might be on purpose. And I think that there should be very few situations where a batter would take umbrage because he got hit as if the guy was trying to hit him for some specific person. Okay, he just hit 2 Grand Slam home runs and 2 at-bats, and he gets drilled. Yeah, you can probably think that the next time was
but you know
on
what?
purpose.
The number of times that happens is pretty low. When the pitcher hits the guy completely unprompted.
And it's probably not the same pitcher, by the way.
Right. But usually, I think the bigger thing happens is a pitcher hits somebody, and then the other team decides to throw at someone. And now you end up getting this weird retaliatory battle where all of these guys are being hit intentionally, but it's spawned from a single guy being hit unintentionally.
Yes.
And I feel like that's what's dumb. That's the problem. You have to recognize the fact that most of the time when a guy gets hit, it is unintentional. Very rarely are pitchers having a guy show them up by getting a hit and then drilling them. Because then you get that Bryce Harper versus, I want to say, Dallas Strickland.
Did you see that?
Right. He hits him, and then like years later, Harper hits one of the most titanic home runs off of this guy that I've ever seen hit, and he just stared him down as he hit it because he definitely remembered the fact that the guy hit him.
I remember on one of the games where one of the position players finished pitching recently. He throws one of his lollipop pitches because he's a position player, and it hits the batter, and the batter lays down. And
I think that was
kicking
I think
around.
that was Darno actually that got hit.
And it was Darno making like he was in such utter pain, and so that was fun,
right?
In that situation because it's a freak situation, and you'll never. So here's a record in baseball that's probably safe forever. Gus Weighing, who has the most hit by pitch, 277, because no one's ever going to pitch the amount of innings to be able to get that many hit by pitches to achieve that record.
Well, I guess it would take some kind of generational pitcher to come up early, and sort of that's his one weakness in his career is that he hits guys, but he's just so good that he just pitches forever.
You hit 30 guys a year for 10 years. If you hit 30 guys a year, you're probably not pitching in the major leagues.
Right, but if you hit 20 guys a year for 15 years.
That's what it would take to be. So every year, well, he's only at 16. You better watch it because he's coming inside.
Right, exactly. You could get a guy where that's his flaw, but he's got such a high K/9 ratio he offsets it or something. But that's kind of the only way I think somebody's beating that record.
I don't know. I think being a specialist and being hit by a pitch is something that I wouldn't want to be if I were a baseball player.
And I think obviously you don't have guys that are headhunters because that's the kind of thing that if you're getting the reputation of as a pitcher, nobody's going to want to be your teammate just because nobody likes headhunters.
Right. So before we close this one, I just wanted to mention, and of course we're really bad at promoting things that we do on this podcast because we get so into the baseball, we just dive right in. Mm-hmm. So this is going to be, I think, our 252nd episode. So we crossed 250. We forgot all about it.
We just completely forgot about it.
So for those that are following us, we missed 250. Thank you for listening and watching. And,
we missed. I think it's just we're too focused on baseball.
Yeah, so we're baseball guys.